Today we're going to design a database using a tool called an entity relationship diagram. So we're going to be doing this in Microsoft Visio. Visio is a part of the Microsoft Office professional package. So to design a database, we're going to start with some business rules. The business rules will typically come from requirements that you've gathered from your users. We're first going to identify all of the entities, and we're going to put those on the diagram. We're going to add attributes to those entities. That's going to include the primary key attributes as well as all the other attributes. And then we're going to identify and diagram all of the relationships. And remember, the objective of doing a database design before building an actual database is to have an idea of what it's going to look like, what all of the necessary components are before we actually start adding data to the database. So this is what we're going to be doing with this lab. So I'm going to open up Microsoft Visio. On my computer, it's under the Microsoft Office folder. If you're using one of the lab computers, it'll be under Classroom Software and then Microsoft Office 2013. But find the 2013 folder, and it should be close to the bottom of that. So here's Visio 2013. Alright, so when you open up Visio, if you open it up from one of the lab computers, it may start up with a bunch of templates like this. If you see a list of templates, you'll want to choose the one called crow's foot diagram, or here it is, crow's foot database notation. Okay. So we're going to use a specific type of entity relationship diagram called a crow's foot diagram. There are a few different ways of doing entity relationship diagrams, but the crow's foot notation is the one that's used in the textbook, so I'm going to be consistent with that. So choose crow's foot database notation, and the first thing is it'll ask you if you want to use US units or metric units, and then you hit the create button, and it will bring you into your diagram in Visio. So the way that Visio works is you have on the right, so this area over here, you have your work area. So the work area is equivalent to an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So that's what the ruler here signifies. So if we were to do this diagram here and then print it out, it would fit on a normal sheet of paper. Over on the left here, we have our shapes. So when we tell Visio that we want to create a crow's foot diagram, then what it does is it gives us these shapes that are relevant to a crow's foot diagram. But if you want to look at some of the other shapes, you can go here to more shapes, and you can see here that there's all kinds of templates for business process flowcharts, engineering diagrams, floor plans, etc. So Visio is a tool that's really designed for creating complex diagrams. You can create some diagrams using something simple like PowerPoint, but Visio has a lot more detail and it has a lot more features to it. So to create an entity relationship diagram, we're going to start by adding the entities. Okay, so before I go into the entities, it's important to go back and look at our business rules. Okay, so that's where we need to start. So our business rules, what we're going to do is we're going to create a database model for a database for a veterinary clinic. And the rules that we have for our veterinary clinic are these here. So we have a customer. A customer can own many pets. A pet is owned by only one customer. A pet can have many visits, so many appointments. A visit is used for one pet. A visit can include many treatments. A treatment can be used in many visits. A medication can be administered during many visits, and a visit can include many medications. Okay, so those are our business rules. These are the things that we would get by talking to the veterinarian and his staff. So now we're going to create a model of a database that will accommodate these business rules. So the first thing we would do is to look over these rules and identify the entities. And an entity is something, an object about which we're going to need to track data. So we have here, we have customers, we have pets, we have visits, we have treatments, and we have medications. So those are the entities that we're going to need to keep track of. So going back to Visio, I'm going to start with the customer. And I'm going to make my sheet a little bit bigger here so it's easier to see. So I'm going to come over here to my stencil. Okay, so the little toolbox with shapes is called a stencil. And I can see here I've got an entity shape. So I'm going to take that shape and click on it and then drag it over to my diagram. And when I do that, you can see here it puts the entity name at the top and then it puts the attributes below. An entity is just indicated on an entity relationship diagram using a box. So I'm going to double click where it says entity name, and I'm going to replace that with the word customer. Okay. The kind of the standard convention with entities is that typically the name of the entity is a noun, and typically we make the entity singular, so we would call it customer instead of customers. And then we need to give our entity some attributes. Attributes are characteristics of the entity. They're things that describe the entity. And when we take this and turn it into a database, usually the attributes are going to correspond to the fields. So usually entities roughly correspond to tables in a database. So when we take this entity relationship diagram and turn it into a database, the customer entity will become a customer table. And then the attributes will correspond to the fields in that table. So I'm going to start by clicking on one of these attributes down here, and I'm just going to put in some things that we might want to keep track of for a customer. So one of the things that we might want to keep track of is the customer's name. So I'll have an attribute called name. We might have an attribute called phone number. If you get to a place where there is not any more room for you to add more attributes, then you can come over here to the shape called attribute. So we have a shape here for that, and just click on that and drag it over to my entity. Okay, and now I have a new attribute, and so let's say address. And let's say we also want to store a credit card number for the customer. So I'll put in an attribute for credit card number. Okay. So these are some attributes. We can probably think of some others. One thing that we need to have is a primary key attribute. And a primary key attribute is something that will allow us to uniquely identify a customer. So the customer's name won't do that because we could have two customers that have the same name. So name is not a sufficient primary key. Instead, we want to use something that's going to be unique, like social security number or a customer number that we assign or something like that. So I'm going to use social security number as my primary key because I know that that's going to be unique for each customer. Alright, so now I have one entity. It has a primary key of social security number and then these four attributes here. Okay, let's go back to our rules. Okay, so we see that a customer owns many pets. Okay, so the next entity we're going to have is the pet entity. So I'm going to come over here to entity. I'm going to click on that and drag it over to my diagram. Okay, and so this one's going to be called the pet entity. So I'm going to double click on entity name and I'm going to call it pet. I'm going to give the pet some attributes. So like the customer, I'm going to give the pet the attribute of name. I will give it an attribute called, let's say, animal type. Okay, if we imagine that our clinic can see multiple types of animals, then I'll create an attribute for the breed. Okay, so the animal type would be a dog and the breed would be a Dalmatian, something like that. And then let's say birth date. Okay, so birth date is better than age because the birth date stays constant. If I have an attribute called age, when I enter the age into my database, it'll be correct at that moment, but a year from now it'll be out of date. If I put birth dates, then that's always going to be correct. So when we're talking about entities, we usually want to think about things that are going to stay relatively constant over time. All right, and now we need a primary key for our pets. So for pets, pets don't have social security numbers, and if we're talking about certain types of animals like dogs, you may have a license number that you'll get for your dog when you register it, but not all animals have that. So we're just going to come up with something that we'll call pet ID. And the idea being that every time a pet comes in for the first time, we assign them a new ID. So bottom line is when you create an entity, it needs to have a unique identifier. If you're unsure of what to use for that, then you can just say, well, I'm going to have a pet ID, or I'm going to have a customer ID, or something like that. And it's going to be a unique attribute that uniquely identifies that entity. So pet ID will be fine. And again, we can probably come up with other things that we could add here, but this is a good enough list for the time being. All right, let's go back here. We have visits. Okay, so I'm going to create an entity for the visits, and I'm going to put this under the pet because ultimately I'm going to connect it to that. So I'll double click here and I'll type in visit. Okay, so let's think for a minute about what do we need to have to uniquely identify a visit. So we could say I'm going to create my own primary key for visits, and that would be, I would call it a visit number or an appointment number or something like that. So that I could do that and that would be correct. But let's think about what do I need to know in order to identify a particular visit. So first of all, my rules say a visit is used for one pet. Okay, so if I know the pet, that's going to be part of defining what the visit is. The other things I need to know are the date and the time. So if I know the pet that's coming in and I know the date and the time that that pet came in, then that should be enough to identify a particular visit. So let's use that, or let's use those attributes as my primary key attributes. Okay, so I'm going to do, for my primary key, I'm going to do the date. And then I'm actually going to add another primary key attribute. So over here on the left, I've got a primary key attribute shape. So I'm going to click that and drag it over to my diagram. So I'm going to have a date, a time, and then a pet number. Or let's see, what did I call it up here? A pet ID. Okay, so if I know those three things, then I will have enough information to know which visit I'm talking about. Okay, so what are some other things that we'll want to know about a visit? Okay, we probably want to know the reason for the visit, right? So some kind of open field for typing in some notes. So we'll have a reason. We might have, let's say we have a certain things that we do every time that a pet comes in for a visit. Like, for example, maybe every time a pet comes in, we take the pet's weight, regardless of what the visit is for. So I'll put in weight here. And then if I have a weight, then I probably want a unit of measure, because some animals we might weigh in ounces and some we might weigh in pounds. So I'll call this unit of measure. And maybe if the pet comes in for a visit, they give the reason for the visit, and then after the vet has seen the pet, then they give it a diagnosis. So I'll add an attribute for diagnosis here. Okay. Okay, so that's enough for the visit for now, and that's here under my pet entity. And then I'm going to have, for the visit, I'm going to have treatments and medications. So for both of these, a visit can include many treatments, a treatment can be used in many visits, a medication can be used in many visits, and a visit can include many medications. Okay, so I'm going to add entities for the medication and the treatment. Okay, so I'm going to do the medication first. And medications have a unique number that is assigned by the Food and Drug Administration. And so I'm going to call this the FDA number. Okay, so that'll be my primary key. Those are unique for the type of medication. And then down here I'm going to have a medication name. I will have a, let's say, a dosage. Maybe I will have a form, so whether the medication is liquid or a pill or topical. And let's say a price. Okay, the medication is going to have a price associated with it. Okay. So I've got a price. All right, and now let's do treatments. Okay, so down here under medication, I'll have a new entity for treatment. And the treatment, so medication has a number that's issued by the FDA. The treatments are kind of up to the individual veterinary clinic as to what they want to call the treatment and how they want to classify it. So maybe for treatments, the treatment name is enough. If we say that we're doing a flea dip or we're doing a fractured bone repair, that's, knowing the name of the treatment is pretty much enough to identify what it is that we're doing, right? So let's just use that to make it a little simpler. So the treatment, the primary key we'll call the treatment name. And then down here we'll have some attributes. So maybe we'll have a description of the treatment. Maybe we'll have different, let's say, categories of treatments. So maybe we have one category for grooming. We have one category for internal illness. One category for external illness, something like that. And then let's also give our treatments a price. Okay. All right, so let me zoom back out here for a minute. All right, so we have 5 entities, and we now need to do the relationships. Okay, probably the more important and probably more complicated aspect of the entity relationship diagram. So there are basically 2 types of relationships that you can have on an entity relationship diagram. We have one-to-many relationships and we have many-to-many relationships. A one-to-many relationship means that you have one entity and it can be associated with multiple instances of another entity. Okay, a many-to-many relationship means that you can have one entity that's associated with multiple instances of another entity, and you can also have multiple instances of that entity related to multiple instances of the other entity. Okay, so you have a multiple relationship on both sides. So for example, going back to our rules here, a customer can own many pets. So that means we have one customer with many pets, or could have one customer with many pets, but a pet is only owned by one customer. So each pet is owned by one and only one customer. So that's a one-to-many relationship. So we have one-to-many between customers and pets. So to create that relationship, so I'm going to zoom in here on customers and pets, we're going to use the relationship tool, or the relationship shape. So I'm going to take this relationship shape and I'm going to drag it over here to my diagram. And the relationship shape is actually a little bit finicky as far as where exactly you attach it. The easiest thing to do is if you take the relationship, so you can see here it's just a line. I'm going to attach one end of that relationship to one of my entities, and I'm going to try to attach it to what's called the connection point. So if you move to the edge of one of your entities, okay, you can see here that it's the entity kind of gets this green box around it. If I get it right in the middle, I've got this thing called a connection point. So my pop-up says glue to connection point. So if I now let go, now this end of my relationship is tied to the pet entity. And now if I take the other end, click on it, I'm going to try to attach that to the connection point on my customer entity. Okay, so now I have a relationship between my customers and my pets. The issue with this relationship is that it is currently backwards. And so what I mean by that is my relationship between customers and pets is one-to-many. Okay, so I have one customer with many pets. All right, what this line is showing is the opposite. The line is telling me that I have one pet that's assigned to many customers. And the way I know that is because over here, on this end of the line, I've got the crow's foot. And the crow's foot, which is that little triangle, the crow's foot indicates that I have many instances of that entity in that relationship. The straight line over here indicates that I have just one instance of that entity. So basically, I want to take this line and I want to flip it around. So there are two ways that I can do that. Okay, the first way is I can just take this and I can grab one of the ends and move it to the other shape. Okay, so I'm just going to take this and basically reverse where I've connected the two ends. Okay, so now if I've got this, now this is correct. So the way I would interpret this is I would say a customer has between 0 pets and many pets, and a pet is tied to one and only one customer. Okay, so let me talk about the minimum, what's called the minimum cardinality for a minute. So the straight line and the crow's foot indicate the maximum cardinality. I can have a customer with many pets, so my maximum number of pets is basically it's infinity because I haven't dictated a specific number, but I know it's some number greater than 1. With pets and customers, each pet is only tied to one customer. That's what my business rules tell me. Now, the minimum cardinality is either the 1 or the 0. So if I have a 1 over here, so that vertical line, that says that a pet belongs to a minimum of one customer. And that makes sense because a pet has to be tied to somebody. On the other side, we have a 0, and the 0 suggests that a customer could have a minimum of 0 pets. So what this diagram is saying is I could have a customer with 0 pets. And you could make an argument for that scenario, but I think intuitively that doesn't make a lot of sense. If you have a customer and you're a vet clinic, that customer has got to have a pet, otherwise they probably wouldn't be a customer. So instead of having the 0 with the crow's foot, what I'd like to have is a 1 with a crow's foot. So if I click this line and then I right click on it, and I'm going to say set end symbol. No, I'm sorry, it's the begin symbol. Set begin symbol, and I'm going to choose 1 or more. Okay, and that gives me a vertical line in the crow's foot. So that says I have to have 1 pet at a minimum, but I could have more pets. Okay, so notice here also, Visio thinks that this is the beginning of the line over here. And naturally to us, we read from left to right, so we tend to think of this as the beginning and this is the ending. But I think that really what Visio cares about is which end of the line did I attach first, and it thinks that's the beginning and the other one's the ending. So sometimes you just kind of have to look and see which one Visio thinks is the beginning and the ending. But bottom line is I want to have a minimum of 1, maximum of 1 relationship on this end, and then a minimum of 1, maximum of many relationship on this end. Okay, so now this relationship is correct. All right, let's look at pets and visits. Okay, a pet can have many visits. A visit is used for 1 pet. Okay, so we have the same kind of one-to-many relationship between pets and visits. So coming back over here to my relationship tool, I'm going to drag this over here. And I'm going to have, let's see, so you've got to get this in just the right spot. Okay, so I'm going to do it like that. Okay, so this end is now glued to my pet, and on this end, I'm going to glue it to my visit. Okay. All right, so now let's examine this relationship. This relationship says that 1 visit can be used for many pets. and many pets can be used, or a pet can be used on one and only one visit. Okay, that's incorrect. So just like we did with the customer-pet relationship, we want to flip this around. So this time I'm going to do it by just changing the beginning and the ending. So I'm going to set my beginning symbol, and so instead of 0 or more, I'm going to make it 1 and only 1. Okay, so a visit is for one and only one pet. And I'm going to set my end symbol to be 1 or more. Okay, so a pet can have 1 or more visits, but each visit is for one and only one pet. Okay, is what we're saying here. You may notice that this line is crooked, and that's because my pet entity and my visit entity are not lined up perfectly vertically. So to fix that, if I click on those two entities and then choose the Align button and say Align Center, then it will line it up. It's not required or anything, it just makes it look a little bit neater. And while I'm on this subject, if you've used PowerPoint, you know that typically PowerPoint offers all of these options in terms of alignments and centering and things like that. And there's also things you can do in terms of changing the fonts and the colors and stuff like that. All of that stuff exists in Visio also. So you can click on an entity, and if you say you want to make it green instead of blue for whatever reason, you can do that. You can change the color of the fonts, etc., etc. So you have lots of formatting options here as well if you want to use them. All right, now let's look at visits and medications. Okay, so here our rules say a medication can be administered during many visits. So each medication can be used in multiple visits. And then also a visit can include many medications. Okay, so one visit could have many medications. So that is a many-to-many relationship. Okay, so each medication can be used multiple times in multiple visits, and each visit can have multiple medications. So my relationship here is going to be many-to-many. Okay, so I'm going to drag this over here. I'm going to glue one end to my visit shape, and I'm going to glue the other end to my medication shape. And this time I want both of the ends to be to have the crow's feet on them. Okay. So question 1. A visit can have many medications. Okay. But we could also imagine a scenario where a visit doesn't involve any medications at all, right? Somebody could bring in a pet just for grooming or to fix a broken limb or something like that, and you wouldn't administer a medication. So a visit could have 0 medications. So on this end of our relationship, this is correct, because a visit could have many medications, which is what the crow's foot says, but it could also have no medications, which is what the 0 says. Now on the other end, we have a medication, and the medication is potentially used in many visits. The question would be, can we have a medication that is used in 0 visits? And I guess the answer to that could be yes. You could have a medication that you have and you don't ever use it, or you have never used it, but you still want to keep track of it. So I'm going to make this end of the relationship a minimum of 0, maximum of many relationship as well. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to my set end symbol, and I'm going to make that also 0 or more. Okay, so I've got now the many-to-many relationship on both ends. Okay, and then lastly, I've got treatments. Okay, treatments is just like medication, right? So I could have a visit that has 0 treatments or many treatments, and I could also have a treatment that is used in 0 visits or many visits. Okay, so I'm going to do a new relationship, and I'm going to do this one at the bottom here. Okay, so I've got the 0 to many cardinality over there, and if I drag the other end to my shape, I want that to be a 0 to many also. Okay, so I'm going to do my end symbol 0 or more. Okay. All right, so let me zoom out here for a second. All right, so here's my completed diagram. Okay, I have the customer with their relationship with pets. Pets have a relationship with visits, and then visits have relationships with medications and treatments. Okay, so in our next lab, we will be taking this entity relationship diagram and we will be converting it to a database.